this window isn't unlimited, and you've been close the past 2 years. You really got to get it home. So I think the big fear is just like that timely hitting. I think playoff games always come down to 2 out RBIs and good 2 strike at bats. So like, when the pressure's up, are the guys going to respond?
Welcome into another edition of On the Record, where we're talking about the next series for the Arizona Diamondbacks. Of course, the Diamondbacks are on quite a run as of right now, having won 12 of their last 14 games. They are 14-4 since the All-Star break. They have won 24 of their last 33 games. And this weekend, the Diamondbacks are taking on a Philadelphia Phillies team that has been outstanding this year, although not nearly as good in recent days. And here to talk about the Phillies with us here today is our friend over from PHLY Sports, that being Jamie Lynch, who does a great job talking Phillies as well as some other sports over at PHLY. Jamie, thanks for hopping on. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, Jesse, thanks for having me. Unfortunately, whenever I think Diamondbacks now, I think Chase Field, House of Horrors, never want to go back. Bad things happen out there. But as you mentioned, yeah, before this series with the Dodgers that the Phillies just got out of, where they actually took a series, they were on the verge of losing 7 series in a row. They lost 14 of 20 games since sweeping the Dodgers prior to the All-Star break. So they have been in a skid. Which is normal in a Major League Baseball season, but we're kind of hoping here in Philly that maybe they're pulling out of it right now as we head back to Chase Field.
I mean, I guess in some ways you'd rather have the skid happen now, right, than maybe closer to the end of the season.
And better than say game 6 and 7 of the NLCS at home. As the favorite. Yeah, that's a better time to hit than then. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, you mentioned it, right? This is the NLCS rematch. We did have an NLCS rematch out in Philly earlier this season, but this is the Phillies returning to, as you said, maybe it's perceived as the House of Horrors now after the Diamondbacks took 2 out of those 3 games here in Arizona during the NLCS. Just by and large right now, Jamie, like I know the Phillies haven't played really well lately. You mentioned they just won this series against the Dodgers, but before that it was 6 straight series losses. Do you think like are people in Philly concerned about this team right now, or is there just a sense that like this roster is really good? There were maybe some injuries, some close games that they lost. Like we still feel really good about this team going into the playoffs.
Panic definitely hit the streets among your fan. I still tune into like sports radio occasionally just to get a little bit of a pulse, and I check out the forums on Twitter, and panic definitely hit the streets. I saw way too many tweets that you have to fire Rob Thompson and move on. You got to change the lineup. You got to do this and that. So there was definitely panic. I think a lot of people that are veteran baseball fans and analysts kind of went, this team is too good to not pull out of it. Bryce Harper and Trey Turner went into a slump simultaneously. And for you to believe that they weren't going to come out of it, you were going to have to believe that those two, who are NL MVP type players, weren't going to pull out of it. And I think your level-headed baseball fan that understands the 162 game complexity was like, all right, this team is too talented. They'll pull out of it. As soon as Bryce and Trey get going, the rest of the roster will get going too.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Trey and Bryce, who are obviously huge parts of this Phillies offense. Another guy who's a really big part is Kyle Schwarber, and he has been just on an absolute tear lately. I was looking at some numbers in his last 11 games. He has a 1696 OPS. His OPS before that 11 game span was 798. Now it's all the way up to 894. It's a difference of basically 100 points in like less than 2 weeks. What have you seen from Kyle Schwarber? I guess not just in this last week and a half, but the season as a whole. It seems like he's really taken a step forward this year.
Yeah, it's been an interesting year for Schwarber. He's hitting lefties better than he's ever done, and that was kind of an Achilles heel and a big reason why his batting average was always around 200 the 2 previous seasons. So this year he figured out how to hit lefties, and he's hitting spectacularly against them. Now, when June Schwarber hits, for whatever reason, his power numbers just skyrocket. So he's been a phenomenal leadoff hitter this year. He's been pretty constant. I would say his power has probably gone through a little bit more dips and valleys than consistency. But when he gets hot, I mean, there's hardly anybody in baseball that can get as hot as him in terms of power. And you saw it last night with 3 home runs, 7 RBIs, his first career 4-for-4 game ever which kind of shocked me a little bit.
Wow.
But he's back, and him hitting lefties this year is phenomenal. His average is up, his on base is up, his power is probably going to be a little down at the end of the year, but you'll certainly take that trade off.
Looking at the pitching matchups for this series, of course, it's a big 4-gamer. We've got Colby Allard against Jordan Montgomery tonight, and then it's Zach Wheeler. Zach Wheeler against Ryan Nelson on Friday. Aaron Nola against Zach Gallen on Saturday. That should be a fun one. And then we finish off with Christopher Sanchez, who's been really, really good for the Phillies this year, against a TBA for the Diamondbacks. Could potentially be Merrill Kelly making his long-awaited return from a shoulder injury. I want to start with tonight's game, though. When I think Phillies rotation, I don't really think Colby Allard. What's the situation here? I know they've got some injuries. What do you expect to see from him tonight?
Colby Allard's a guy, when he goes into a game called up from the minor leagues, you just kind of expect him to take his lumps a little bit. You hope that you can get through a solid 4 innings. That's all you're really looking for. If you can get 5, that's fantastic. Taijuan Walker and Ranger Suarez are both due back for the Phillies probably at the beginning of next week. So this is likely Colby Allard's last start here for the Phils. You certainly don't feel great going into a Colby Allard start, but not somebody that's really supposed to be here. So we'll see what happens. The Phillies are probably going to go to a 6-man rotation coming up here in the month of August with Tyler Phillips, the guy that started for him last night, taking that 6-man spot, kind of ease Ranger and Taijuan back into it. And then, try and get the arms rested and right in Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler as you get ready for the playoffs. But Colby Allard, you certainly don't feel great about. But Saturday night, as you alluded to, that should be a great one. And then Christopher Sanchez on Sunday, Jesse, he's been great at home, struggled on the road a lot this year, had a great start out at Dodger Stadium recently. So hoping he can get kind of 2 road performances in a row here because they've needed it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess on the Diamondbacks side tonight, D-backs fans aren't necessarily feeling great about Jordan Montgomery and the season he's had. Interestingly, yeah, it sort of goes both ways, I think, with tonight's game. Interestingly, one of Montgomery's few really solid starts this year actually did come against the Phillies at Citizens Bank Park. I think it was 6 innings, 2 runs, 1 walk, 5 strikeouts, something like that. If I'm remembering correctly, I think there were maybe a couple of calls that went his way. I don't think he was getting a ton of swing and miss or anything in that game, but maybe the Phillies are a good matchup for him somehow.
So you bring that up. Have you guys noticed umpiring this year? This is a constant conversation we're having. It all evens out at the end of the year, but do you guys out there watching the Diamondbacks night to night feel like it's almost getting worse? Because I don't know if it's the amount of StatCast technology and the pitcher strike zone that you see on TV, and we have more information than we've ever had. But it seems to us on the show this year, umpiring's a tough job. We get it, all that. But it almost feels like it's going the opposite direction of good.
Yeah, that's a totally fair hypothesis. I can't really say for sure. It doesn't feel like it's been good. I guess I can say that. But at the same time, yes, we do have. I mean, we all have the MLB app in our hands at all times. We know exactly where these pitches are, and I think pretty much every broadcast is showing you the box on TV now as well, which makes it all the more easy for fans to be able to tell when mistakes are actually made. I'm pretty sure statistically, I think I saw an article over at Fangraphs about this recently. I think statistically umpires are actually getting better pretty much every year, slowly but surely. But yeah, the eye test, I'm not going to argue with you. It doesn't necessarily feel like what I'm seeing on a day-to-day basis. Another Phillies question I have for you. Their trade deadline approach seemed to be, it wasn't overly conservative, but it wasn't overly aggressive either. And it seems like Dave Dombrowski kind of has a reputation as being more of an all-in guy. And I know he did pay handsomely for Carlos Estevez. It seems like that was maybe the biggest acquisition the Phillies made. They also got Austin Hayes from the Orioles. I think Tanner Banks came over in a trade as well. Do you think the Phillies should have done more, or was this a case of the roster is pretty darn good as it is and they're already in a pretty good spot?
I was more positive than most because I thought the Phillies trade deadline was smart, not sexy.
Sure.
Dave Dombrowski, I went back before the deadline leading up to it and really dove into all the history of his moves. and he is known as the aggressive guy, but most of his big stuff comes in the offseason. And I
Yeah.
think that's what you saw here. He was like, look, I've given you a payroll that's, $315 million. My big moves are done. What I need is the supplemental around the edge moves. And as you mentioned, Estevez was, the big one. He really should solidify that bullpen into a pretty nasty bullpen and a different one than the Diamondbacks saw last year. A little bit of addition by subtraction. You got rid of Sir Anthony and Gregory Soto. Kimbrel can't hurt us anymore. So the bullpen is much improved, and any good playoff team is going to, supplement the bullpen. Austin Hayes left the game last night with a hamstring injury.
Right.
I was big on going for it and going after a Luis Robert or a Randy Arozarena. Because I wanted a little bit more pop in the outfield, because it's not very often you're the best team in baseball and you have a great chance to win a World Series. So I was a little disappointed by that, but I thought Austin Hayes, not having to give up any prospects to get him for a guy that, has performed at this level, I thought it was smart, not sexy. We were all kind of shocked to find out that he was going to be the full-time left fielder. When the trade was made, most people speculated that Hayes and Marsh were going to platoon left.
Huh.
But it turns out they gave him the job. He's kind of been a singles machine since he got here, but got the hamstring knock up last night. So we'll see how long he's sidelined for.
I feel like Phillies and Diamondbacks, like this does feel like sort of a monumental moment in a sense. You mentioned the House of Horrors earlier. Do you think, like, is that how Phillies view this series? Or, are they like people worried about playing the Diamondbacks this weekend? Or is it kind of just more of a fun, like, let's try to get revenge from what happened last October?
Well, I just feel like prior to even last year, we always struggle out there. I don't know if it's the sight lines for the batter. It's a big park. They just never seem to perform that well there. I've actually caught a Phillies game in person there myself years ago. And I don't know. It just feels like one of those stadiums, like San Fran is like that for us. Whenever we head to San Fran, just expect the worst. And I kind of am getting that feeling about Chase Field. We'll see what happens. It's a little bit of PTSD last year, but
Sure.
you really blew it at home, and that was the hardest part about last year was
Right.
coming back game 6 and 7. So overall, I think people are a little like, Chase Field, great. If you can get the 2-2 split, I think everybody's rejoicing.
Yeah, I think Diamondbacks fans would maybe feel the same way about that. Obviously, Phillies are a very, very good baseball team.
Yeah, and Corbin
Uh,
Carroll has really caught fire. So we're aware the Diamondbacks run they're on. We're hoping that we're coming out of this downturn for us. So it should be a great series in terms of two teams with a lot to play for. And Saturday's, one of the better pitching matchups you'll see across baseball.
Last thing for you, Jamie. Playoffs are really what matter most for the Phillies at this point.
Yeah.
They're in a really good spot in the NL East. I don't really see the Braves or Mets making a serious push there. So heading into the postseason with that spot essentially secured at this point, like, what are the biggest concerns or maybe question marks for this team that I think some people would consider the Phillies to be the favorites to win the World Series, or at least one of the teams that's very much up there. But every team has its potential flaws. What do you think those are for this Phillies team?
It's just like, can you play the small ball? Can you produce runs when you're not bopping? I think is the big concern. Because again, it's what happened last year in games 6 and 7. It's not like those games weren't winnable. You just weren't getting those timely clutch hits from your highest paid guys. And I think until we overcome that, that's going to be the fear with this team. The bullpen's much improved from last year. The rotation is much improved. Christopher Sanchez, as we talked about, has really taken this rotation up a level. So I think it just comes down to that timely hitting. And, we've seen Bryce Harper be clutch. When this man gets enshrined in Cooperstown one day, you really want to see World Series champion under it. So I think there's a little bit of pressure because this group, Kyle Schwarber, Trey Turner, Bryce Harper, Schwarber's one, but they're all, getting up there on the back end of their primes. So
Sure.
I think everybody knows that, like, this window isn't unlimited, and you've been close the past 2 years. You really got to get it home. So I think the big fear is just like that timely hitting. I think playoff games always come to like come down to 2-out RBIs and good 2-strike at bats. So like, when the pressure's up, are the guys going to respond? So I think that's kind of the biggest question mark.
Well, we'll see what happens. Should be a fun 4-game set this weekend. Be sure to follow Jamie over on Twitter. You can find him at J.E. Lynch Jr. Over on Twitter. Be sure to keep it locked to everything that he's got going on, as well as the
I'm glad you're still calling it Twitter and not X.
Yeah,
I can never refer to his X. It's weird.
Yeah, I'll never get there, Jamie. It's never gonna happen. But yeah, we're excited to see what happens this weekend. Should be a good series. And Jamie, thanks again for hopping on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jesse. Always great to hop on with you.